Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the channel. It's been a few weeks. I just got back from a long delayed vacation. This vacation actually was to two national parks that I hadn't visited. I've been to a lot of the national parks, but there were two in California that were missing, that were really high on my list, and I finally was able to visit them. I actually tried to visit them a few years ago, but I couldn't because of fire. And the two parks that I just visited are Yosemite and Sequoia National Park. And I have to say, even though the reputation of these two parks is quite high, they do not disappoint. Yosemite Valley is a truly spectacular piece of landscape that, in its sense of scale, and it's awesome in a way that I would say the Grand Canyon is awesome. It's very impressive. And in terms of wildlife, we saw bears. I actually saw a mountain lion there, woodpeckers. It was fantastic, really fun. It was great and peaceful and wonderful and relaxing and centering and all of those things. But I have to say that for me, Sequoia eclipsed even Yosemite. Sequoia National Park and the giant sequoias themselves are unlike anything I have ever seen or experienced. So a few years ago, we tried to go, but Sequoia was on fire, and there were fires all around the edges of Yosemite. I realized a few years ago already, that there was a real chance that the giant sequoias were not always going to be there to see. Whether or not the trees are there, or there's just simply no access to them. I realized that I needed to do it sooner than later. And I highly recommend anyone who has not seen a giant sequoia in the wild. I guess that's really the only, so there's a big disc. There's a giant cookie of a giant sequoia in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, which I have seen. It's something, I don't know, is it a 20-foot diameter slice of tree with dates of pitiful little humanity shown in its great rings. The sequoias, witnessing them in their natural groves, I honestly do not know how to really describe it. They are so otherworldly. They absolutely feel like you're in the presence of something truly other, but not in an alien way, but in a bit of an awe-inspiring, almost deity way. They're so big. And their color is so remarkable, this really remarkable orange-red color, that when you're walking through these forests where the giant sequoias grow, and there are very few of them, the habitat where a giant sequoia can thrive and become giant is minute. It's these tiny, tiny little strips of land on the Sierra Nevada, on the west coast of the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges in California, and that's it. People have planted giant sequoias elsewhere, but they won't be giant unless they are in this very, very narrow habitat. It's just the story of the giant sequoias and of Western Americans is pretty gruesome. So by the time Europeans showed up on the west coast of the Americas, sequoias, which prehistorically, sequoias were around early, they were around with the dinosaurs. Sequoias go back at least 200 million years. And their habitat used to be very widespread. They used to be all over the northern hemisphere of the planet. By the time Europeans got to the west coast of North America, giant sequoias were only in this tiny, like, as I said, this tiny sliver on the Sierra Nevada mountains. And of course, Westerners didn't discover the sequoias. There were Native Americans living with the sequoias for hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of years, and very carefully maintaining the forests around there with ceremonial and careful burning of underbrush and things like that. The sequoias, one of the ways they get so huge and they live so long, they can live over 3,000 years, is that they are remarkably fire resistant, and they capitalize on this in a very interesting way. They have adapted to rely on fire to propagate. So their pine cones only open for the seeds to come out. They will only open in a fire, almost like popcorn. So the pine cones burst open and the seeds disperse when they're heated to a certain point. And the fires get rid of trees that would be competition for young sequoias as they develop before they mature. And so the fire clears the way for new sequoias to grow, and the fire also launches the seeds into this cleared space for them to grow. So it's an ingenious way that has worked for at least 200 million years. So 100 years ago, 150 years ago, when we first discovered the sequoias, the giant sequoias, we logged the fuck out of them. So initially, we logged them as trophies to show how big the trees can be. There were some counties in California that wanted to be more popular, wanted to be known, and some of them thought that they could be known if they cut down one of these giant sequoias and showed it at for example, a world fair or a state fair, things like that. So initially, a lot of these trees were killed in order essentially for trophies. The big cookie that I saw as a kid in the American Museum of Natural History in New York, that's one of those. That cookie was cut from a tree, a named tree that was cut from the Mark Twain tree. That was one of the largest giant sequoias in the world at the time. It was cut sometime right around 1900. And these slices were sent off to various museums because, of course, every museum wanted to show this unbelievable slice of what was a living thing. Of course, the trophy trees didn't do as much damage as the logging companies did. The loggers, over 50 or 70 years, they actually cut down about 90% of the giant sequoias that were alive 150 years ago. And because sequoia wood is the way it is, it's a bit brittle, it's quite fibrous, all attributes that allow it to grow to such a huge size and to be relatively fire resistant and insect resistant. Unfortunately, it makes lousy lumber, and so the vast majority of the wood from these felled giant sequoias over the years, less than 50% of it ever got to the mills, and whatever got to the mills was generally made into shingles, matchsticks, and things like fence posts. Really astounding. Sometime around 1900, in the late 1800s, this guy named Walter Fry moved to California and got a job with one of these logging companies, and was in charge of some of the felling of these trees. And after a particularly fearsome battle, where 8 or 10 loggers struggled for a week or more to fell one of these magnificent trees, he sat down by the stump and he counted the rings, and he counted something like 3,100 rings on this tree, which of course means that the tree had been alive on planet Earth for 3,100 years or more. So when he realized that these lumber barons were hiring these crews to log these living things that were alive 1,000 years before Christianity was even conceived of, he had a bit of a crisis of conscience, and he was one of the people that was instrumental in. He and John Muir, also in California, were instrumental in starting to protect the giant sequoias, both in near Yosemite and also, of course, the big groves in Sequoia National Park and Kings Canyon National Park. Anyway, if you have not seen the giant sequoias, I strongly urge you to go see them, and don't wait. Almost every single one of the giants, they are giant and they're awesome, but pretty much every single one of those trees had horrible burn scars on them. Some of them where a huge percentage of the bottom of the trunk is just gone and blackened and gone. Some of them smaller burn scars, some of them larger. It's remarkable that some of the trees are even still alive. But fire has gotten to every single part of the giant sequoia habitat. So they are not going to be around or accessible forever. See them, feel what it's like to walk in the forest amid these ancient, colossal life forms. It is truly awesome. On this trip, this 2-week trip that I had, I brought a book. It's a recent biography of Led Zeppelin, and so that was my reading material on this trip, and that was pretty eye-opening as well, I have to say. I had always heard the stories. So Led Zeppelin, I think I've talked about this before in other videos. Led Zeppelin, maybe it wasn't my first musical crush. That maybe like the Banana Splits when I was a little kid or something like that. But it is certainly my longest lasting musical crush. Meaning it's a band that I absolutely love. It's definitely the first band that I collected entirely. I collected every record, including the posthumous Coda, when it was released. And I absolutely adored it. It was the band that I listened to the most. But of course, you hear the stories, the stories of the decadence of the Led Zeppelin U.S. tours, and the groupies, and the drugs, and the mayhem in the hotel rooms. It's all sort of part of the cloud of the time, of the 70s, of, Bowie was doing it, Rod Stewart was doing it, The Who, they were nutbags. Everyone was throwing hotel furniture out windows. Everyone was doing drugs. Even Elvis was doing drugs. It all sort of was part of the mystique of Zeppelin, along with the photographs of them posing outside of Starship, their giant Boeing airliner that they toured with, and it was all sort of part of the mythos of these guys, these young gods of the 70s. But reading about it, fucking A, man, these guys were fucked up. And I have to say, it's mostly Jimmy Page that creeps me out. And he is already, this is not news really to anyone who knows anything about Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page was known for going after extremely young groupies and having sex with extremely young girls, 13, 14. But again, it was what was happening at the time. The most notorious one, this Lori character, who she was 13 or 14 and was a groupie involved with Jimmy Page for a couple of years, lost her virginity to David Bowie. So it's a thing in the 70s. It's awful and icky and disgusting. But one of the things that makes Pagey extra creepy is he was obsessed for his whole life, as far as I know, still is obsessed with Aleister Crowley and the sort of mystics and the creepy world of the occult and black magic and all of that shit. So in the book, his entourage, his manager and or his handlers, essentially abduct Lori from a club and bring her to a hotel room where she meets Jimmy Page for the first time, and he's dressed in a big hat and a cloak and a cane like some fucking wizard. And it's mind boggling. And forget about all of the heroin and the wreck that the band became, and that coupled with Page's massive heroin addiction. Of course, poor John Bonham. He's referred to often as the Beast. His nickname was the Beast. He was the one that behaved outside of the pedophilia realm. He was the one that behaved the worst. He drank more than most groups of 5 drinkers would, and was the most notorious in terms of destroying hotel rooms. Of course, was also hooked on heroin, and of course died of heroin and drink, and thus ended the band. So it is a very, very dark tale. It's worth a read. Anyone who's really into Zeppelin, like I am, I wouldn't have wanted to not read it. And it definitely it felt icky in a lot of ways, because I really do love the music. It goes through the what the band was doing, each of the tours. It talks about the state that the band and all the members were in during the recording sessions of all the records. And it really is interesting to track the band's decay over the years with the decay of the quality of the records over the years. Mostly Presence and In Through the Outdoor. In Through the Outdoor is the one that is most obviously Led Zeppelin light. And I am not including Coda in these. In Through the Outdoor essentially was made when both John Bonham and Jimmy Page were so fucked up every day that they just weren't around. They didn't go to the studio. And so Robert Plant and John Paul Jones, the bass player, ended up essentially kind of writing the album and tracking stuff. And then Jimmy Page would drag himself in at midnight and kind of make some tracks and then patch stuff together and rearrange stuff and put some guitars on. Bonham would do sort of the same thing. He would come in and track some of the drums, which incidentally makes it all the more astonishing. John Bonham's, on a sidetrack here, a little bit of a tangent. John Bonham's drum part on "Fool in the Rain" is one of the most important tracks in the history of rock and roll. It is a shuffle. It's a version of the Bernard Purdie, the Purdie shuffle, but done with a rock inflection that influenced so much of rock and pop drumming after it. Jeff Porcaro from Toto admits to essentially lifting it for his shuffle in Rosanna. Steve Gadd uses a lot of that shuffle in so much of his studio stuff in the 80s. So it is really sort of astonishing that Bonham, the genius John Bonham, was still in his last few months of bare consciousness, was able to still put down masterworks like the drum track in "Fool in the Rain." A nice highlight in an otherwise not great record, but I digress. So when I got back from my trip, and I got back here today, this is my second day back at the office, I dug out Zeppelin 1, and I put it on and I listened to it. And Zeppelin 1 is them as teens and 20s. I think they're 20. Bonham, I think, was 18. They're all 18, 19, and 20 when they recorded Zeppelin 1. Maybe Page was 21. I don't know, but they were all really young. They recorded it in something like 36 hours of studio time, something like that, over a month or so. They just formed. They didn't even have a recording contract. It is such an incredible record. Zeppelin 2, obviously, an incredible record. 3, I love. I know not as many people love it, but I love it. Zeppelin 4, people say it's played out. It's a masterwork. Physical Graffiti, Houses of the Holy. These are really, really amazing, amazing records. So while I am glad, I am hungry for knowledge, and I am happy to have the knowledge that I have about Led Zeppelin, about the life of Led Zeppelin as a band and its members. It maybe it has now been moved into a guilty pleasure column, although I don't know even if that's really necessarily fair, because we all knew that Jimmy Page had a hunger for very, very young women, and maybe it was just sort of set gently in the backs of our heads and wrapped in opaque paper. But yeah, it's the whole question: does the artist ruin their artwork by their behavior? And I don't know. For the most part, I think no, and I don't think it has diminished my appreciation of Zeppelin. Anyway, that's a long ramble, and I'm sorry. Go listen to Zeppelin 1, and please go try to see the giant sequoias. Don't wait. They're not going to be around forever. It's true. Thank you for watching, and I will see you at the next video. Bye.